Hello there, fellow gamers. My name is Ashes, and I welcome you all to the channel. Today we are doing an ASMR video, and we're going to be continuing Far Cry Absolution. So, Far Cry Absolution is a book we are reading, and this is going to be Chapter 2, Part 2. So, while we make our way to the jacuzzi on our yachts, we're going to be getting the book ready. And I'm going to open to the page where we finished. Okay, so we magically changed into our swim gear, and we're going to take a seat in our jacuzzi. It's a beautiful sunny day. The water is nice and hot. So I've got my book here in front of me, and I'm going to continue from where I left off. Let's go. Mary May came up along the edge of the dry avalanche chute, using the slender branches of juniper to pull herself along. She had quit the forest a little while ago, and she climbed now in the open, her breath labouring with the efforts, the slick feel of her own sweat down the inside of her shirt. The sun behind her in the west, the heat felt warm against her back, the metal of the 38 feeling solid and heavy beneath the waist of her trousers. The gun and a hooded, zippered sweatshirt were all she'd had time to take from the truck before she'd run. She had lost John and the rest of his men almost 5 hours before. She climbed now with her alpine breeze, smelling like cracked rock and melted ice, ruffling at the loose fabric of her shirt and teasing out a couple strands of hair that dangled about her face. Stopping at the base of the ridge, she set the .38 to her side, then crooked water from a stream and washed it over her face, up along her hair, and then rubbed it along the back of her neck. She drank from between her hands, and then stood there looking at the wavering leaves all around, waiting and watching, hoping they would not still out there someone trying to follow her. Satisfied for the moment, she sat there on a large rock and peeled down the jeans she wore to view the dark bruise where her hip had hit the truck door. The bruise purple and black, 3/4 up her thigh, stretching under the line of her panties and up along her side. She had scrapes in other places, some from where the truck had gone off the road, others from the bush she had been bushwhacking through most of the day. There had been a thought at one time to head down toward the road, but she had given up on it, knowing John was out there, knowing he was looking for her, and that as she had run from the overturned truck, moving through the trees with the sound of the men behind as they crashed through the underbrush after her, she was certain they were not there to offer her any kind of help. 20 minutes later, she had cut a sharp path to the east and then ducked in behind its wide web of roots still clutching at the rocks and dirt that had once surrounded it. She went along the trunk, keeping low, and as she came to the ball of roots and soil, she looked back down the mountain to where John and several of his men were standing no more than 100 feet away, all of them with their weapons, bearded and tattooed, their eyes searching out the surrounding wood, trying to discern what path they would pursue. She held the .38 in her hand, and her breath, when it came, seemed louder than she had ever heard it, though she knew it was only a whisper. That fear she felt had only made her think it was all louder. "Mary May!" John called, his eyes roaming now around the surrounding wood. Come out, wherever you are." He was almost singing, and he looked now in the direction of the big windfall there, but his eyes only passed it by, then continued. "No one's going to hurt you," John said. He had taken a few steps, and she watched them. She watched the big Magnum revolver he held in one hand as he moved. How he ran it one way, then another, as if it were some form of divining rod. And she, the precious water. Sorry. No one wants this to go any further than it has to. She waited. She watched him take a few more steps. His men had already gone ahead of him, and he was still looking around. The dark shadows of the forest coverage all around him, and the great canopy of the trees above. "You come out, and we'll take you to see your brother. We'll take you right to Eden's gate. We can all be friends. We can all just be one big happy family. You, your brother, me, and everyone else, the Father, and all who hear his words." She watched him till he walked out of sight behind the roots. Then she moved back along the trunk, following him and peeking over to watch where he was going. He spun, but she dropped just as fast, her hand still clutching the .38, her face pressed down in the damp forest floor. When she looked again, he was another 100 or so feet on, moving in the direction his men had gone. She watched him till she could not see him any more, and then she ran. A few hours later, she had rested at the stream. An hour after that, she was climbing the avalanche chute, and had come out into the open, using the squat juniper bushes to hold on to. Now she came to the top of the windswept ridge and stood there looking down. Steep rock cliffs ran much of the opposite side, and stepping closer, she peered now into the dark shadow of a deep abyss. Rock and talus collected 300 feet below. She had She had climbed the ridge hoping to get her bearings, but all she saw was more forest and more hills, mountain after mountain stretching on ahead. Somewhere out there was her brother. All she truly knew about the location of Eden's Gate was that it rested somewhere along the lake further on, a place that had been scoured out by glaciers millennia ago, the water deep and the mountains and the hills that surrounded it running right down into the blue-green water. But it was still very far from where she was. She looked into the direction she thought Eden's Gate might be. Scanning the ridge she stood upon, then running her eyes down along the far side and out into a river valley far below. 2 or 3 miles on the opposite slope from where she stood, she could see the white dots of animals moving in a mountain field. What she thought at first was a herd of mountain goats now appeared to her as sheep, and as she studied the surrounding grass, she saw a man walk out from the edge of the forest and stand watching the sheep, then move back beneath the trees. She stood and took it all in for the better part of 5 minutes before she picked her way along the ridge and found a small, gradual chute to descend upon the river valley there below. Will kept a few feet out from the big tree trunk and roots ball of the fair. He circled and looked each footfall over. He saw how she had pressed a knee to the ground, and at one point, and how the edges of the depression showed the slight shift of her movements, as he could only guess she had hidden behind the large trunk and then moved to peer over it at whoever had pursued her. What had she been saying? Will asked. Lonnie turned to look at him. He was standing off a bit in the place. Will had gestured for him to go. What was she saying to the people in town? What made her come out here? Ugly things, Lonnie said. That we were murderous, that we were hiding things, that we were keeping secrets. Are we? Lonnie kept his eyes on Will and gave a half smile, and then turned to look back at the way they'd come, as if John might be standing there. We haven't done nothing that hasn't needed to be done. You've seen the baptized. I've seen it, but I'm having a hard time remembering it's been done quite the way when the brothers first came upon from Georgia, Will said. The father means to cull the herd. He means to separate the weak from those of us who are strong. And which is Mary May? You know her, don't you? What would you say? I knew her, Will said, but that was a long time ago. That was before I came to Eden's Gates. I knew her family too, and I've seen her brother, Drew, at Eden's Gates. But I haven't spoken more than a few words to him since he joined. I wasn't there when he was baptised, and I guess I don't know his story. As a kid, Drew always seemed to idolise his daddy, Gary, following him around like he was Gary's own shadow. But Gary was always against Eden's Gates. I guess for Drew, that's changed. Well, Lodi said, things have changed. Things have changed a good deal, even from the time I came up here. Even from the time John invited me up to this place and told me it would be all milk and honey. But it hasn't been, has it? Lonnie looked around at the forest, at the fallen fir tree. This look like milk and honey to you? He said. How long do you think it'll take before we track her down? I'll track her as far as I can, but it doesn't mean we'll find her. She could get down into a riverbed, or she could travel over rock and not leave any trace. Just 'cause we're looking doesn't mean we'll find her. Well, which way did she go? Will looked up, ran his eyes away from the trunk and out among the trees. She went this way, and it looks like she was running. It's the spacing of the footfalls, Will said, rising now and pointing several out. Catching up to her is going to be no easy task. That right? Will walked and kept his eyes down along the ground. He followed Mary May's path up through the forest. The dun of needles displaced here and there where she brought a heel down or pushed off with the toe of a shoe. The last time he'd seen her, she had been a teenager, just old enough to work the bar. But that was a long time ago, a very long time since he'd come to the church and gave his soul over to the Father and divorced himself from all he'd known. Mary May came on them just as they were finishing their tea, and one of them rose out to meet her. He walked out to her from under the tree where they had their fire and their cook pots. She said hello and watched him where he stood. The sun was already in the trees to the west, and soon it would be gone altogether. Only saying a few words to her in Spanish, he motioned for her to come over and to sit and eat with them. There were two of them, a father and his teenage son, and it had been the father who had invited her to share their tea. They were eating corn tortillas heated in a pan set by the fire, and in the pot simmered a kind of thick stew of meats and beans and spices that smelled of some other world she had not known existed here, but that caused her mouth to water. A bowl was fixed and tortillas given. She sat and ate as they watched her, when she had eaten one tortilla and started on the other, running it around the sides of the bowl and using it to clean the edges. The man asked his son something. Then the son spoke to her in English, asking what had brought her here. Okay folks, so we're gonna end the reading here. So I've got a few pages done in this video, and I hope you all enjoyed. So for now, we're going to call it a day or a night, as it's night on the game and it's probably that time when you're watching as well. But I hope you all enjoyed. Until next time, take it easy, and I'll see you all in the next one.